Lunar New Year begins in China, but celebrations this year will be much tamer than usual. That deadly coronavirus outbreak has authorities taking new, unprecedented, drastic action today as they try to keep a lid on it. World-famous attractions in Beijing and Shanghai are now closed, and 13 cities with a combined population equaling Canada's nearly in lockdown this morning. Let's begin with the latest numbers from Chinese officials. The number of dead stands at 26. 2 of the people who died are outside the infection hot zone, as it's known, in China's central Hubei province. There are at least 830 confirmed cases of people sickened by the virus. The number of reported illnesses outside mainland China, it's also up this morning. New cases in Singapore, South Korea and Japan have pushed the total to 19. In Canada, health officials say no one is being treated for the virus, but they are testing a number in the country.
There are new images out of Wuhan that purport to show the dire conditions in hospital. This is unverified video posted on the Chinese social media platform Weibo. It was shot by a woman who claims to be a nurse at Wuhan Red Cross Hospital. The original post has since been taken down. The woman says medical workers and patients were stuck with 3 dead people in a packed hospital corridor and that there was no leader and no one to take care of the bodies. Thomas Yao, a correspondent for the reputable and independent South China Morning Post, says the video appears to be shot in Wuhan, but he can't be sure of all the details or the date it was shot. We're also learning Canada's visa application processing center in Wuhan has been closed on the orders of the Chinese government, again to help minimize the virus's spread. And the U.S. State Department is pulling most of its diplomats and their families out of that city. Meanwhile, the health minister reiterated the fact there are still no confirmed cases in Canada. Patty Haidu spoke on her way into a Liberal Party caucus meeting this morning.
The public health system is monitoring cases of suspected symptoms that might match the profile of a person coming from Wuhan. But as I said just a moment ago, there are no confirmed cases, and we continue to interact with our provincial and territorial partners to make sure that we have current information. So it depends on the situation. Again, if the person has traveled directly from Wuhan, which is really the epicenter of the disease, then they may be monitored for a number of days until it can be confirmed that they don't have the illness. We're meeting each day to get updates from the World Health Organization, from our international partners. So if there's any change over the weekend, we would certainly come back to you with information.
Experts say the risk of an outbreak in this country is low. Health officials confirm at least 20 people have been tested in Ontario and Quebec. British Columbia and Alberta are also doing testing. This morning, medical experts gave a briefing in Toronto. The CBC's Megan Fitzpatrick has the details.
Their main message was one of reassurance and of confidence. They were saying there are no confirmed cases here in Toronto or in Canada for that matter, but they are bracing for cases to arrive here. They're saying they're prepared for it. If and when it happens, they say the public health system here in Toronto, in Ontario, is strong. They talked a lot about the lessons that have been learned since the SARS outbreak back in 2003 and other experiences too, like the H1N1 virus. And they were saying how much better communication is between health agencies within Canada, but also internationally. They were saying how it's been very helpful this time around with this new coronavirus, that China has been forthcoming with information, they said, and just talked about the speed at which this is developed, saying that already there's a test for this new coronavirus, so hospitals and doctors here in Toronto can get a result within 24 hours, and they said that's really very remarkable. They did say if and when a case arrives here, though, that it's not like people here in Toronto will see the city shut down or on lockdown. Here's more of what the public health agency lead for Ontario had to say at the news conference about that. Take a listen.
People look at the somewhat intimidating and scary images that they see from the particular province in China. They may think that if there was a case in Toronto or Ontario, that somehow we would immediately go into a similar situation. Absolutely not. If a case comes here, and it is probably likely that we will have a case here, folks, it will still be business as normal.
So So business as usual, they're saying. They also outlined some of the other things they've been doing to prepare, Andrew, including talking to the airport authority, Pearson International Airport. Hundreds of passengers arriving from China every day, particularly with the Lunar New Year holiday season starting this weekend, but also, of course, travelers from around the world coming through that airport. And they talked about having meetings with officials there, as well as Peel Region health officials where the airport is located, the screening measures that have been put in place, the training that's been put in place for people that work at the airport there too. And bottom line, they said if it does happen here, they pledged to communicate with the public about it, Andrew, saying if the situation changes, the public will know about it right away.
And Megan, what advice did the officials have for members of the public?
Well, they did say they know that the public might be worried, might be concerned. There's a lot of media attention on this right now. So they urged the public to seek out reliable sources of information about this new coronavirus. And they said the Toronto Public Health website is one of those sources, the Public Health Agency of Ontario, Public Health Agency of Canada. And they said, especially if you're traveling in the next few weeks, go on that website, have a look at the travel advisories that might be on there. And then they also noted, too, that this is flu season. There's a lot of influenza going around. And so their advice was to practice proper hygiene anyway at this time of year, and that includes getting a flu shot. It includes staying home from work if you're feeling ill, washing your hands a lot, using sanitizer, and covering your mouth if you're coughing. So their advice in general, aside from this coronavirus, was to protect yourself from influenza and other viruses that are circulating at this time of year. But again, their main message, Andrew, really was one of reassurance. They wanted to be out here today talking to the public and just letting everyone know that if and when it happens, they'll be ready for it here.
The CBC's Megan Fitzpatrick in Toronto. You can find much more on this story online, answers on key things to watch for and what to do if you think you're infected. There's also a timeline on how this virus emerged and spread. It's all on the front page of our website right now, CBC News.
We have this new drone footage for you this morning. It's extraordinary, showing excavators working furiously as they break ground in Wuhan, the epicenter for the outbreak. They're racing to build a new 1,000-bed hospital to treat patients. And they say this one is modeling the one built in Beijing at the height of the SARS outbreak back in 2003. They plan to have this new hospital finished by next Wednesday. That's 5 days from now. Reporter Patrick Falk is in Beijing again for us this morning with the very latest on these expanded quarantine measures now in place right across China.
There is a question mark as to whether or not these efforts to quarantine people are really having the desired effect, particularly because of those 2 cases of fatalities outside Hubei province today that we learned about. One in Hebei, that's a particular concern for people here in Beijing because much of Beijing is surrounded by Hebei province. There was an 80-year-old man who had apparently visited family in Wuhan and came back. That was the first reported case outside of Hubei. And also in Heilongjiang, one man dying. Heilongjiang borders with Russia as well. So, you know, as far as we could gauge, according to some reports, authorities kind of get the impression that there is this weaker strain, milder form of the virus that has been spreading, and that's why the focus of containment has been on Hubei. This suggests that it perhaps goes further than that and that they may need to rethink their strategy altogether.
The situation now, Patrick, just extraordinary. More than 20 million people now affected by these various measures. And one of the things we're starting to hear from people as they speak is how concerned they are, how fearful they are of these measures and what's happening. How difficult is it for authorities, though, to police these lockdowns?
Yeah, well, we're hearing reports already that there do seem to be cracks in some of the efforts that they're trying to put in place. In particular, one story about a woman who managed to travel to France and get through checks. She's going to be presumably feeling some repercussions as a result of that, because authorities are taking this very seriously. But, you know, as you say, it's got to be an incredibly difficult thing to keep people penned in like this. We all are also hearing reports of people still arriving in Wuhan City. We're not entirely clear whether this is before or after the quarantine began and whether or not people are actually being allowed to enter the city. But they're saying, well, what do you do? It's Chinese New Year. It's tradition. We come and stay with our family, and that doesn't change. So they're putting themselves at risk. But certainly it's a difficult situation for authorities to get under control right now and make sure that they are able to contain the virus, which is what they're trying to do.
Patrick, as you mentioned, the Chinese New Year, we are on the eve of that. And we're hearing today that many attractions, I'm thinking of Disneyland, we're hearing about even McDonald's restaurants shutting again as part of this effort to contain the virus. So this holiday this year is likely to look very different. Can you give us some detail about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is about as miserable Chinese New Year as I can remember. I mean, people are in a state of panic here in Beijing. I mean, you're seeing cars in the streets, but there aren't a lot of people around at all. And those that are out are all covered in face masks. They are definitely concerned. They are avoiding crowds. Authorities here have told people not to gather in big crowds. Here in the capital, they have shut the Forbidden City, perhaps Beijing's, if not China's, most famous landmark, a place that a lot of tourists would be wanting to go and visit. But yeah, lots of attractions, the celebrations, those aren't going to be happening. In particular as well, maybe of interest to those in Canada, the Cirque du Soleil, they've cancelled their shows, even though they're 700 kilometers away from Ground Zero, Wuhan. So it does certainly seem as though what was meant to be a fun week of holiday is going to be a little bit of a dry period for China, and we don't know how long this is going to last exactly.
That's Patrick Falk in Beijing this morning.